right around sunset. The dogs were running so beautifully, and we were just moving down the trail. And we were running down the middle of like the giant Yukon River. I remember just really feeling like, how have we even gotten ourselves here, dogs? Like we are running down the Yukon River, no one around. And the sun was setting this like beautiful pink color over the whole landscape. Like even the snow, everywhere I looked, is just pinky orange. So beautiful. I felt in that moment just so incredibly lucky to be out there in that wild, wild feeling place, moving through the world with those dogs. That moment will forever be special and etched in my brain.
Hello, intrepid listeners, and welcome to the Carpe Diem Live Your Dream podcast. My guest this week is Anna Hennessy, calling in from the dog mushing capital of the world, Willow, Alaska. Anna recently completed the Iditarod dog sled race, arguably one of the most daunting races in the world. Her passion for mushing is so contagious, and somehow she makes the 11 days and 1,000 miles of solo travel through the frozen Alaskan wilderness sound like a walk in the park. This episode is a perfect example of someone pursuing a really audacious dream and achieving it in spades. If you like this episode or my others, please send a link of the podcast to a few of your friends. Enjoy the show. Welcome, Anna Hennessy. First off, let me tell you, you are my hero. Ever since I was a little kid, I have marveled at that race, the Iditarod. I don't even know why exactly. It's just so epic, and the experience of traveling through that winter wilderness by dog sled must be out of this world amazing. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Thanks, Dale, for having me. I'm quite honored. I am a dog musher. That is my passion. I grew up in Red Wing, Minnesota. As a child, I actually was not allowed to have a dog, which is kind of funny because I've more than made up for it as an adult. Uh, I then kind of moved on after graduating high school to Luther College, got my nursing degree. I still currently work as a nurse, an ER nurse in the summers. And when I turned 25, actually, I first stepped onto a dog sled and it changed my whole life. After that, I started pursuing dog sledding every winter relentlessly. And yeah, it really became my ultimate passion. And I currently am living in Alaska during the winter, specifically racing and training sled dogs. So I guess, yeah, that's a little synopsis of who I am.
Well, I'm going to come back to this no dog as a youth, and then suddenly your life is surrounded by dogs. I'm going to come back to that
Yeah.
in a minute. I am thrilled to have you here talking about the Iditarod specifically because to me, the Iditarod dog sled race has just this amazing aura. When I was, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years old, our neighbors on the Minnesota River Valley, they raised sled dogs. And I remember going to bed at night and hearing them howling through the woods. They would take the dogs down to the Minnesota River on a service trail and run them in the summer with a buggy and sleds in the winter. And they had aspired to do the Iditarod. And so that's when I came to know the race. Just tell us a little bit about that race and we'll get more into how you got there yourself. What is the Iditarod?
So the Iditarod is a 1,000-mile sled dog race across the state of Alaska. It traverses all kinds of terrain. Like when I say across the state, it really does go across the whole state. It starts just outside of Anchorage, and the trail continues north up and over the Alaska Range, Big Mountain Range. Denali is part of that range. And then the trail moves into the interior of Alaska, known for really deep, deep cold, and continues down the Yukon River all the way to the coast. And then It traverses actually across sea ice. So you are actually running over the frozen ocean. And then it ends in a little place called Nome, Alaska. The Iditarod follows the route of the historic serum run, which a lot of people are familiar with. Um, when the first diphtheria uh, vaccines were brought by dog sled to save a lot of the children in Nome, actually.
Oh, I did not know that's why it got the name Serum Run. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that's why it's called the serum run. And the Iditarod is based off of that, like somewhat loosely, but based off of that original serum run and trail. So, quite a bit of history there. The Iditarod then was created actually to save the sled dog in Alaska because snow machines started to replace the work that sled dogs were doing. It became easier to move things by snow machine or even airplane than by sled dog. And so Joe Reddington created the Iditarod as a way to, keep the sled dog and the spirit of the sled dog alive. So that is, I guess, my best synopsis I can give you of the Iditarod. It's turned into a really wild and special thing.
Whenever I've read lists of some of the world's toughest races, the Iditarod is always on the short list. You've got the elements, you've got just the physical aspect, the mental aspect, the solo aspect, the dog care. There's just so many unique aspects to that race. What made you want to run in it?
Hmm. I love a challenge. I love to be uncomfortable. So I think it's important to note that first about myself. um,
Uncomfortable, like physically and just like
physically and like
unknown.
unknown emotionally too. Like I think I have learned throughout my life, like that's when growth can really happen, is like during times of discomfort.
I agree.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I think first of all, it's important to note that. And then I found this thing that makes me feel completely alive, and that's dog sledding, and specifically racing, like the challenge of racing and creating a really intimate bond with these animals so that they trust me to, do what I ask of them, and then I trust them with my life really to get us where we need to be. And I love the challenge that racing presents of, really having to take care of the dogs well so that you can get where you need to be the fastest. I kind of discovered this. I love to be uncomfortable. I really am a competitive person and I love traveling with dogs, especially through wild places. The Iditarod, that is the ultimate adventure. That like checks all those boxes, right? It took a while before it even became a reality in my mind that maybe I could do that someday. I could actually run the Iditarod. And once that idea really took root, I really became fixated. I was like, I will do whatever it takes to get myself and the dogs there.
So you had a pretty remarkably fast journey up that dog sledding ladder of success. So you said the first time you were on a sled was your mid 20s
Yeah.
and you just knew that that was the thing for you. And then you got more involved with dog sledding. And then at some point, this dream of the Iditarod hit you. Can you talk a little bit about that progression of your dreams and how you achieved them? Because that's pretty fast.
Yeah. Yeah. I do. I feel very fortunate. It was quite fast, especially for having, not discovered mushing until I was 25. So when I was 25, I first stepped on a sled. It was at Camp Minogan up near the edge of the Boundary Waters. I just had like a little six dog team and I was a tourist essentially going for a dog sled ride. And I remember standing on those runners and thinking, my life is going to change. I love this so much. I have to pursue this. And I was just so in awe of those dogs and the feeling it gave me to be like running along that frozen lake with them.
I'm sorry, I have to interject here, Anna,
Yeah,
because you mentioned it happened at Camp Minogen,
yeah,
and as you know, I'm quite familiar with the YMCA Camp Minogen. I love the place. I sit on their board right now with your father. What
yeah,
did your father think of this sudden change in his daughter when, because he's involved with Camp Minogen as
yeah.
well. When you stepped on there, was he, uh-oh, what's happened to my daughter? Or what
Oh
was
no,
his
he was
reaction?
so excited because he knew it meant that maybe I'd try to work at Minogen the next winter. So he
Okay.
was very excited. I think he also knew that it would keep me near the boundary waters or in wintry wild places, which he loves and would loves to visit still. Yeah, so
Special to him. Yeah.
he
Yeah.
always was very excited and supportive.
That's cool. Okay. So, yeah, please continue then.
So the next winter then I did work at Minogen and I just kind of was an assistant to the mushers. After that, I continued to pursue mushing. And the next winter, I really went all out. Actually, I went with someone from Minogen to work at a kennel up in the Arctic of Alaska at a lodge. And we were just not competitively racing or anything, but taking care of a kennel of dogs and running tours for this lodge. But it was great experience. I really learned how to put in trail, how to take care of dogs with limited resources, and that was my, I think, first experience with really deep cold. It'd be 40 below for weeks on end. We were up in the Arctic. Though I spent that winter in Alaska, I loved it. Like Minnesota's always been home for me. So I ended up back in Minnesota the next winter, living in Grand Marais. I was lucky in that one of my best friends in the world, Erin Altimus, she owns her own kennel. She has like 30 to 40 sled dogs. And I was able to handle for her and work with her kennel and really get to know her dogs. And I actually lived at the kennel with the dogs. And she taught me like really how to train for racing and how to care for dogs while racing. And it was with her and her husband's kennel that I got to run my first race. And that's when I really became hooked on the racing idea. I was like, oh, I love the challenge of this. And so it became pretty clear that, Anna and her husband are so welcoming and I loved working with them and their dogs, but there weren't enough resources for all of us to race. So I kind of got Alaska back in my brain. I got a little bug that maybe I needed to like really pursue racing big time and just go all out, move up to Alaska. So I started perusing Facebook because so much of the mushing world actually happens on Facebook, which kind of amuses me. So I was perusing a female mushing Facebook page and I found a woman named Kathleen Frederick who said she was looking for somebody to race and train her Iditarod kennel. And so I just kind of like on a whim sent her a message, didn't think much of it. And she actually called me right away. And she said in our first conversation, she listened to my experience a little bit and she said in our first conversation, like, give me 3 years and you can run the Iditarod. And that was like,
Wow.
yeah, that was a very powerful moment for me because it was the first time anybody had actually said, like, you could do this thing.
Did you have the Iditarod in your head at that point, or was her offer the first time it really struck you that you might do that race?
I had it in my head, but as such a distant dream because to find a kennel with Iditarod caliber dogs where, like, financially you can make it work, it's so hard to do. So I definitely had it as a distant dream, but I don't think I had a lot of faith in like finding the right situation.
So that was your golden ticket.
Yeah, exactly.
And what does it take when she said in 3 years we can have you running the Iditarod? What
Hmm.
is it that takes 3 years? Is it for the dogs to train up? Is it for you? Is it for the combination of the two?
That's a good question. Part of what takes 3 years, in my opinion, is knowing the dogs and learning and like each of their quirks. And personalities and their strengths and their weaknesses and really building a bond with them and creating trust. That takes time and shared experiences. And then also to run the Iditarod, you have to run qualifying races. They don't just let anybody sign up for this 1,000-mile race. That is, I forgot to mention, completely off the road system. There are no resources or anything. So you kind of have to prove yourself first. So before running the Iditarod, you have to finish a 200-mile race, and then you also have to finish two 300-mile races. And those are
Okay.
your qualifying races. And that takes time. So 2 to 3 years usually. And I ended up doing actually all of my qualifying races that first winter, and we did them all in 1 month. So it was, we really went all out, and I was very tired at the end of that month, but it set me up to run Iditarod the second year that I was actually in Alaska, which was just this
Wow.
past year.
Yeah, that was 2024, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
The spring, what is it? Run in March?
Yeah, in March. Yep.
Yeah. I love the meteoric rise up through the dog sledding world. I love the stories when someone locks their sights on a particular goal, a passion, and then they just rocket through it.
Mm.
That's congratulations on that one.
Thank you. Thank you.
I really want to talk about the race a little bit. And
Yeah, of
so let's
course.
start with what you were feeling the moment you had your dogs hitched up and you first crossed the starting line on the
Mm.
Iditarod. What was that
Oh,
like?
it was such a good feeling. I would describe it as a combination of relief, surprisingly, and also some type of euphoria to actually be doing the thing. I think what a lot of people maybe don't realize is as soon as you take off from that starting line, you're just on the runners behind your team, and you do have 1,000 miles of travel ahead of you. But in that moment, that feeling is just so incredibly familiar to just be standing behind your team and moving through the world because it takes thousands of training miles to even get to the start line of Iditarod. So when the 3, 2, 1 happened and we left that starting chute, I felt so relieved to just be doing this really familiar thing with the dogs moving through the world. And I also felt completely euphoric to know that I actually was starting the Iditarod. So euphoric to even have the opportunity to be there, especially with those dogs. I was feeling so bonded to them in that moment after all the time and training that we had done together that season.
Yeah, I cannot imagine the excitement too at that starting line with the crowds, the dogs are just all wound up.
Right. The start of a dog sled race. I don't know if you've been to one, but they are it's wild because the dogs are screaming to get going. The energy is just it's palpable. Yeah, you can feel it. The dogs want nothing more than to just sprint.
Run, just run.
Yes, through that start shoot. And so, yeah, the energy is really unbelievable. And the Iditarod for sure was like the biggest crowd the dogs and I had ever been around. I've never given so many high fives in my life.
Yeah. You start with 16. You don't necessarily finish with 16, do you?
You start with 16, and some of the dogs inevitably end up sustaining minor injuries like a sore wrist, or, maybe they lose their footing, step into some really deep snow, maybe hurt a shoulder or something. And as soon as that happens, their race is usually done because they're not going to keep running an injured dog. And so, if a dog does have an injury, they will be dropped from the race. And since the race is off the road system, they actually are flown home on a bush plane to Anchorage, and then they're picked up by a handler, one of my handlers here at the kennel. But the Iditarod has an incredible team of vets who, cares for these dogs all the way until they are back at home and safe with their handlers. My goal was to finish the Iditarod with as many of my 16 that I started with as I could. And throughout the race, I ended up dropping just four of my 16 dogs. And three of them were due to really minor musculoskeletal injury. And then the fourth one actually caught a GI bug and she got sick at the end of the race, wasn't feeling well, so she had to go home for that.
And you're out on the trail,
Uh-huh.
what, like 11 days, right? Was it 11 days?
Yes, 11 days. Yeah.
Yeah. And I cannot, I've been in Alaska once and never really remote and never in the winter, but I cannot imagine the nowhereness where you're running. And when you say you're just going across, pack ice and such, it's just frozen wilderness day after day. Can you just describe a typical day, the sights, the sounds, what you're doing, how you feel?
Yeah. Oh, it's hard to, the terrain varies so much because it's 1,000 miles. So it's hard to really describe specific terrain, but I would say I think it's important to preface when you when you imagine a day in the Iditarod, you're not sleeping very much as the musher because you're racing. Kind of the routine of racing is you will run, anywhere from 40 to 70 mile stretches and then you stop for anywhere from 3 to 8 hours, depending on how the train and the run has been. And I would say it breaks down into you running about 100 miles a day or 100 miles in 24 hours. So
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of mileage for,
it's a
I guess,
lot.
yeah, 1,000 miles in 10 or 11 days. That is 100 miles a day.
Yeah. So when you
Wow.
stop between runs, you spend, the musher spends, an hour or two taking care of their dogs, feeding their dogs, bedding them down, massaging them, checking for any injuries. And then eventually you feed yourself, the musher, and you put yourself to bed. By the time you have to wake up to feed the dogs again and take care of them, you've slept maybe an hour or two. So a lot
Wow.
of Iditarod is actually how well can you function when very sleep deprived?
I
um,
Yeah. Yeah, day
yeah,
after day.
day after day, yeah.
Did you ever fall asleep on the sled underway?
A few times, yeah. And that's a
You must
scary
have.
thing. Like some people
Yeah.
a lot of people have fallen off their sleds when falling asleep. Um, for me, the hours between like 6 to 8, 5 to 8 a.m. are really, really tough. I don't know why, but they're my sleepiest hours. So I can like find this position where I kind of have an iron grip on my handlebars where I can nod off if the trail isn't too technical. So yeah, there were many times when I'd be just dozing, especially on the Yukon River because it's a nice, flat, easy terrain. Nothing's keeping you awake out there.
How many hours in a typical day are you running to cover that 100 miles?
Towards the end of Iditarod, like 7 to 8 miles an hour, and then running about 100 miles a day. So
Okay. Yeah. So you're underway for what, 12 plus hours?
yeah, definitely. You're
Yeah.
running more than you're resting. Absolutely.
And the purpose of this podcast is, as you know, to inspire people to get outside and try some cool adventures like sled dog racing, like
Yeah.
mushing. Describe your best, most euphoric moment during that race. And
Hmm.
crossing the finish line doesn't count, but describe just really what you got out of that and in a way that would describe to people why they ought to go try mushing or at least
Hmm.
try some kind of winter wilderness experience.
Yeah. When I look back at the race, there's a moment on the Yukon River that is very special to me. You're running down the Yukon River when you've made it past the halfway point in Iditarod. And I remember I was out there with my team, and it was right around sunset. The dogs were running so beautifully, and we were just moving down the trail. And we were running down the middle of like the giant Yukon River. I remember just really feeling like, how? How have we even gotten ourselves here, dog? Like, we are running down the Yukon River and
No one around you,
no one
even
around.
close.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
And the sun was setting this like beautiful pink color over the whole landscape. Like, even the snow, everywhere I looked, is just pinky orange. So beautiful. I felt in that moment just so incredibly lucky to be out there in that wild, wild feeling place, moving through the world with those dogs. That moment will forever be just really special and etched in my brain. To me, that is the reason I hope that anybody would want to pursue mushing or have that experience, is to experience the wide, wide open wilderness with those dogs.
Yeah. And even, you know, far lesser way,
Hmm.
just when I've gone out winter camping in the Boundary Waters canoe area, the way you described that scene on the Yukon, I probably get a semblance of that same feeling just out snowshoeing across a frozen lake in northern Minnesota or southern Canada. It's just a remarkably beautiful scenery that just
Totally.
makes you feel so, I don't know, peaceful, spiritual, comfortable.
Exactly.
Just got to get
Yeah.
out there and try it though.
Yes. Yeah, I think that feeling could be, you don't have to be on the Yukon to recreate that feeling. I think it could happen just about anywhere doing something you love. I also find
Mhm.
it very empowering. The importance of, being somewhat self-reliant when in nature or wild spaces is very empowering to me. And I carry that with me back into my day-to-day life. So,
Yeah,
especially for young folks, I think that is an important reason to get out and be in nature.
that is a very consistent theme I've heard from many of my other guests where when you realize what you can accomplish, like you 11 days in the middle of nowhere, Alaska in the winter, surviving with just you and your dogs, covering 1,000 miles, and people do experiences like that. They come back home and they realize what they thought was a tough challenge in day-to-day life ain't nothing, and it makes it so much
Yeah.
easier to get over those hard things in life of your
Hmm.
normal life, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
very much
puts a
so.
perspective
Very
that
much so.
is a healthy perspective on what really is a problem in life and what really isn't.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. That's a really good point. I like that that's been a theme for you.
Yeah, yeah. Um, you had described earlier how you always grow most when you're challenged, and so you did the Iditarod. You crossed the finish line. Congratulations, by the way. And
Thank you.
how would you say you grew from that race?
Hmm. I definitely feel that I grew in my ability to, I guess, coming back to the theme of self-reliance, my ability to really trust myself, to be able to push through when things feel really hard, almost impossible. And that is something that like carries into my day-to-day life. And I think I also really learned I really can read and care for dogs well under pretty extreme conditions. And I think I hadn't, for whatever reason, really trusted myself to do that until I really proved it to myself and the dogs during the Iditarod.
Yeah, I would think after accomplishing an event like that, you got to feel like you can pretty much accomplish anything that you put your mind to.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think it taught me that I am a very, yeah, I think getting to the Iditarod taught me that I am perhaps even more driven to accomplish whatever crazy dream I may set my sights on next. Like, I think I can make it happen. Might be hard, but that doesn't feel so scary anymore.
How would someone get involved in mushing and dog sledding? I mean, you described it's not an inexpensive activity for those who have to raise the dogs, but to give it a try, I know YMCA Camp Minogan has wonderful family camps in the winter where you can go experience that. Do you have other thoughts that are accessible to the average person?
Yeah. Well, mushers are always looking for help. Like the actual act of running dogs is a pretty solo thing, but everything it takes to get to the trail it requires a whole team. So, um, if someone were to want to be around sled dogs or learn about the lifestyle, I think just reaching out to a musher, asking if they want help, asking if they ever need somebody to watch the dogs at the kennel or really anything of the sort would be a good way to like get a very real experience.
I
Mm.
guess that's how you got started, and it's how a lot of people who are really into horseback riding get just
Yeah,
helping out at barns, right?
there are a lot of parallels there. Yeah, very, yes, exactly. It's a lot of work, and maybe like that is not, it's not everybody's cup of tea. So another option would, of course, be to find somewhere to go on a tour where you can just get out and actually be behind a team of sled dogs in the woods. I don't know if there are many places in Minnesota that do tours right now, other than Minogen, but they are all over Alaska, so it's pretty easy to find.
And I know you said mushers always need help, kennels always need help, and you have a
Mhm.
website, annainalaska.net, where you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about your experiences, some great photos. People can make donations to dogs. They can contact you. Is that the best way for people to reach you?
Yes, yeah, most definitely. And that's the best way to learn about the dog specifically. We have descriptions of each of their personalities with a little photo, and any sponsorship help is so, so very appreciated. It goes directly to the dogs, helps us provide, the highest quality kibble and care for them.
Anna, I always finish this podcast with the question, what's next? What's your next dream? You've done the Iditarod.
Yeah.
What are you dreaming about next?
Oh, I have many dreams. Well, in like a week and a half, I'm going to be running the Yukon Quest 450 in Canada. This has been a dream for me almost as much as the Iditarod. I've been looking forward to running this race. It's a new route this year, and my goal is to be more competitive because our dogs are like finally a little more mature. When I started working here at this kennel, our dogs were really young. They were just yearlings and 2 year olds, and we really like grown together and experienced a lot. And they're now 3, 4, 5 year old dogs, which is ideal for racing. So that's a big dream coming right up. But beyond that, my partner Emily and I are hoping to start our own kennel and raise our own dogs. And we'll be starting that kennel with a lot of the dogs that we have been working with here in Alaska. But we hope to start that kennel in Minnesota, actually closer to home, and still continue to race. But yeah, to do so with our own dogs and to hopefully have like a pretty open door, welcoming feeling where we can get people out with our dogs and share this passion with anyone who's interested, really. So that's another big dream on the horizon.
That is that is big. That is
Yeah,
big. And
it's big.
I always want to practice what I preach, and so I really hope someday I'm able to come visit your kennel and stand on the runners with some dogs in front of me. That would be so wonderful.
Yes, please. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We'd love to get you out.
Anna, thank you for your time today. This was wonderful for me to have a chance to connect with you on mushing and the Iditarod.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Bye now. Thanks for listening to the Carpe Diem Live Your Dream podcast. If you like the show, there's nothing more valuable to me than you following it and sharing it with others. I drop a new episode every Friday, so tune in again for another great adventure story. And check out the accompanying website, www.gocarpediemnow.com, and then go seize the day and live your dreams.